Hi everybody, it's Annette from The Art of Intuition, and today we're going to talk about old timelines, letting them go, recognizing old timelines, and the more subtle timelines, because as we get more and more into our journey, the timelines that were easy to sever ties with, and I say easy just based on the fact that they were easy to identify. Maybe there's a lot of disrespect in the reality, we didn't enjoy the reality, it just felt on a higher consciousness in the higher realms. It was not aligned. And we kind of knew that. We were either going small, we just did not feel like that was the best we could be, right? It was not the best we could do. It gets a little bit trickier when you get into the higher realities and you go into higher realities, not even trickier, but to our human, it gets sometimes disheartening because we get into the higher realities and you get timelines that are aligned. And remember, every timeline is aligned for something you're trying to work through. So you can you can anchor in a higher reality where a timeline is aligned in that moment, but that doesn't mean it's going to be aligned later on. I know I've had a lot of the timelines that have come in for me in the last few years that they might not have been exactly the way I wanted them. And when I first got them, I kind of resisted them because I didn't like how it was happening. You're going to find that sometimes in the higher timelines you don't get them the way you want them. And there's reasons for that. You could be working through ancestral DNA, which was part of the reason I was going through it. If you've always been the person to support people, then you're going to have to be supported for a while so you can kind of get into that energy. There's always going to be a balance that comes back and forth. There's always going to be a balance that goes back and forth that you have to deal with, right? That you have to kind of master. So you get to these timelines where they were aligned. They might not have been the way you wanted them. They're definitely higher aligned. Are they the highest aligned reality? No, but they were the highest aligned in that moment for you. You were able to recognize that. So you were a lot different than you were in the beginning of your journey. You're able to see, okay, this is highest aligned. This is a good part of my journey. This is a good part of my journey. I don't know why I said it like that, but it's in a higher frequency, right? So this is a good one, even though it's not the way I wanted it. Even though I'm working through a lot of stuff, I'm clearing programming, even though I'm in a higher timeline. We kind of have this sensation that because we're in a higher timeline, we're not supposed to be clearing programming anymore. And we're still going to be clearing programming. You're going to always be clearing programming. So you get to these higher timeline realities. They might not be the way you wanted them, but it's how you got it. Kind of get used to it. But you're going to start to find over time that reality starts to get a little bit harder. It's a little more difficult. And sometimes it's because we're clearing programming. So you have to really check in to see, am I clearing fear and programming and that's why I'm not enjoying this reality anymore? Or is the reality just no longer aligned? And you're going to have to look at it at both ways. Is it this isn't aligned, or this is something I've got to go through, I just don't like the way it's happening? So you have to kind of check in with yourself and see. And you can ask for external signs. Is this am I supposed to do this, have this happen? But there'll come a time with any timeline. If it wasn't exactly the way you wanted it, and they didn't make you extremely happy because you were clearing programming, you're going to get to a point in the timeline where it's going to be now not aligned anymore on your highest levels. Where you can go next, your new timeline, the new timeline you were trying to bring in when you got this timeline. Because the frequency of where you were then and where that new timeline was you really wanted was you weren't there yet. So you got this kind of middle of the road timeline. And you're like, okay, now I'm in this middle of the road timeline. I don't really like this timeline, but I want to take it because it's kind of unexpected and it's not really the way I wanted it, but here it is. But now you can make a jump to where you want it to be, in a sense, in a different energy, in a different timeline, a different frequency. But you still might find yourself kind of wavering here a little bit because even though it wasn't exactly the way you wanted it, it had become a safety net, even though it wasn't the safety net you wanted. It was something that you had familiarity with. You knew you could count on it, even though you were clearing programming. It wasn't the easiest timeline to go through, but there was in some way you could count on it, and you knew you could count on it if you needed to. And there was going to come a time you kind of have to choose. And you'll know the difference. You'll start to feel the difference, because especially if you have said, which I'm going through this now, I'm done with this timeline. I've been going through it for so many years. I'm done with this timeline. It has to shift. It has to change. I'm not going to do this again. Then you get to the time again when this timeline normally comes in, and you just like, okay, are you going to hold your own and say you're not going to do this again? Or are you going to go back into that timeline again because it's familiar, I can't even say the word. It's familiar to you. Are you going to go through it again? When I said, no, I want this one, and things were working out where that one looked possible, but I'm not quite there yet. But if I say no to this one, I don't know what's next. So just be aware of that. Be aware of when you're holding on to something that used to be aligned on a higher consciousness level. It's just not there anymore, because you now have to go to the next step. You have to now take a step up, and we have to start taking that step up. That's when we start running into problems. Not really problems, but running into resistance. And I didn't realize personally for me how much resistance I had in my body until I just kind of sat with it one morning. I was just laying in bed and I just kind of felt it. And you can kind of feel it in your body. Your body's resisting that change. It's resisting. It kind of wants the quick out. I had a friend that used to say she built a trap door into every reality. She could just jettison out of there. And you're going to get to this timeline, this choice. You jettison out of there again and take the one you don't really enjoy, but in some way it's there, but then you're going to have to revisit it again in another 2-3 months because you're still playing in it. Or do you say, no, I said I was done. I need the new timeline, because you can't have them both. That was a lesson I learned a long time ago, but it pays. I kind of have to pay it more attention again, even if you're talking about realities that were aligned in a higher frequency. It doesn't mean they last forever. It still means you're going to shift and change, and things that did work aren't going to work anymore. Even if, like I said, it wasn't the way you wanted it in the first place. If it wasn't your dream reality and it hasn't been that dream reality for you, no, you were working through programming, so it had a purpose. All of those eventually don't have a purpose anymore. And it's time to move on to something else, but we kind of resist that moving on to something else because we have this idea because, oh wait, but it was a higher aligned reality for me. It's not supposed to happen like this, right? Like the new ones are supposed to come right on in, but in a sense, it doesn't matter. It's still lower frequency. Even if it's a higher frequency than you were at before, it's still lower frequency than the reality you're trying to bring in. There's still a discrepancy there on those realities. And as long as there's a discrepancy there in those realities, you're going to see an issue. So just be aware of, no matter what frequency that old reality was, when it's played out, it's played out. It wasn't really what you wanted in the first place, but you were there and you knew there was a reason for it. And you knew when you're working through programming. I knew when I was working through that old reality, when a lot of fear came up and I had to bust through that fear. Okay, now I've busted through that fear. I mean, going to the next thing, it was still a lot of fear there. It was a lot going on. But then it gets to the point where you're like, I just don't need it anymore. I don't require this anymore. Just take it away. And you'll start to see it sort of shift, but then you still get to that moment again where the universe is saying, okay, now you got to choose. So just be conscious of yourself and what you're holding on to, because it's a quick fix. And it's what you've been going to, even if you've been going to for a couple of years. It's, you're going back to that same well of water because it's been there, even though you kind of didn't want it to be that well of water. You wanted it to be a different well of water, but you kept going there because it was the one that was there. All the other ones were closed or under construction. Maybe under construction is a better word. They were all not ready yet. So you were in this well, and you kind of got comfortable there. You kind of nested. And now it's like, well, I called for a higher one, and now I have to be willing to walk to that other well and leave that one behind. So just understand that nothing's permanent. In the higher realities, it's going to shift a lot, and look at really what you're holding on to and why you're holding on to it. Look at the fear you got look at the fear. The fear is going to tell you, are you more afraid of not going back into the old timeline, or going into the old timeline that used to cause you a lot of fear? Now that doesn't bother you that much, but now not doing it is more. Where's the greater fear? That's going to tell you where you need to go. You got to bust through the greater fear and keep practicing the art of intuition.